Imagine being trapped in the middle of Antarctica. No help, no escape, just ice, silence, and something wearing your friend's face. The Thing wasn't just a horror movie. It was a masterclass in paranoia, a slow-burn nightmare that made audiences squirm, scream, and decades later still argue about that ending. Number 1. Kurt Russell came up with the final line of dialogue. That cold, quiet ending of The Thing still chills people to the bone. After all the blood, paranoia, and flames, MacReady leans back and delivers one final line. "Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens?" Now watch. That legendary line wasn't written by screenwriter Bill Lancaster. It came straight from Kurt Russell himself. On a freezing set, exhausted and surrounded by burning wreckage, Russell improvised a moment that perfectly captured the film's bleak, uncertain tone. That single line became a defining piece of the movie's legacy, a final gut punch that leaves audiences frozen in doubt. It also showed Carpenter just how sharp Russell's instincts were, paving the way for future collaborations. Number 2. Universal agreed to the ambiguous ending on one condition. That haunting finale, MacReady and Childs sitting in the freezing night trading suspicious looks as the fire dies, almost didn't happen. Universal Pictures wanted a clearer ending. Studio executive Ned Tannen only agreed to let John Carpenter keep the ambiguity if there was at least a hint that the creature might have died. So Carpenter added a single subtle detail: a beastly scream as the camp explodes, implying the Thing perished. What most fans don't know is that multiple endings were filmed and considered, from MacReady's rescue, to Childs wandering off alone, to both being saved by helicopter. But Carpenter stuck to his gut. He knew the real terror wasn't the monster, it was not knowing. And that decision gave us one of the most chilling and debated endings in horror history. But the story doesn't end there. In Fact 11, you'll discover how Morricone's score turns that same frozen tension into a heartbeat that makes every second feel like survival itself. Number 3. The Thing's final form required 50 technicians to operate. That monstrous final showdown, tentacles thrashing, jaws splitting, everything squirming, wasn't CGI. It was a massive mechanical puppet, and it took 50 people to bring it to life. Every movement of the Blair Thing's final form in The Thing was a perfectly timed symphony of cables, hydraulics, and puppeteers sweating behind the scenes. Special effects genius Rob Bottin pushed practical effects to their absolute limit. Coordinating lighting, explosions, creature movement, and Russell's performance simultaneously was a logistical nightmare. But the payoff was legendary. Even after 40 years, this grotesque finale still looks disturbingly real because, well, it was. No green screens, no shortcuts, just raw craftsmanship. Number 4. Lee Van Cleef, Brian Dennehy, and Donald Pleasance almost played supporting roles. Imagine if some of Hollywood's most iconic tough guys had joined the crew at Outpost 31. Before the final casting, John Carpenter considered major stars for key supporting roles. Western legend Lee Van Cleef was eyed to play Gary, the grizzled commander. Brian Dennehy was nearly cast as Dr. Copper, and Donald Pleasance, Carpenter's old collaborator from Halloween, was originally set to play Blair. Pleasance had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts, and the others were never locked in. Still, it's wild to imagine Pleasance losing his mind in that shack, or Van Cleef's icy stare leading the group. The final cast did an incredible job, but man, this alternate lineup would have made the film feel like an all-star paranoia powder keg. Number 5. A 4-hour miniseries was originally planned for 2003. Before the 2011 prequel, there was another plan, and it was big. In the early 2000s, Universal Pictures and Sci-Fi were developing a 4-hour miniseries titled Return of the Thing. It would have picked up 23 years later, with a Russian team stumbling upon MacReady and Childs' frozen bodies, and, of course, reawakening the alien horror. Produced by Frank Darabont and written by David Leslie Johnson McGoldrick, the story would have shifted the carnage from Antarctica to New Mexico. It was ambitious, different, and could have expanded the mythos in a fresh way, but Universal eventually scrapped it in favor of the prequel film. Fans remain divided on whether that was the right call, but one thing's certain: the legend of the Thing refuses to stay buried. And if you think that's extreme, just wait. In Fact 14, we'll see the jaw-dropping defibrillator scene, where practical effects make the terror literally bite back. Number 6. It was not successful upon release. Today, The Thing is hailed as one of the greatest sci-fi horror films ever made. But in 1982, it flopped. Critics called it excessively gory, nihilistic, and even gave Ennio Morricone's legendary score a Razzie nomination. At the box office, it was buried, in part because just weeks earlier, audiences fell in love with the friendly alien in E.T. the Extraterrestrial. People didn't want despair, they wanted hope. Even the director of the 1951 original publicly bashed Carpenter's version. The failure was so crushing that John Carpenter lost his multi-film deal with Universal Pictures. Ironically, it was released on the same day as Blade Runner, another classic bomb that later rose from the ashes. Years later, through home video, The Thing clawed its way to cult status, proving sometimes the world just isn't ready for greatness. Number 7. Tobe Hooper was considered to direct it. It's hard to imagine anyone other than John Carpenter behind The Thing, but early on, Universal Pictures had other plans. They seriously considered Tobe Hooper, the man behind the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, to direct the film. Hooper even wrote 2 drafts of the script. His version? A horror comedy without the iconic shape-shifting terror. Executives hated it. Co-producer Stuart Cohen later admitted bluntly, "We avoided a disaster. It would have been one of the worst movies ever made." Ouch. Once Carpenter came on board fresh off Halloween, the tone shifted to the cold, paranoid nightmare we know today. Hooper's version might have been weirdly campy. Carpenter's? Pure dread and pure cinema history. Number 8. MacReady is a PTSD-afflicted Vietnam veteran. We don't get much backstory in The Thing, but John Carpenter and Kurt Russell secretly built one for MacReady. They imagined him as a Vietnam War helicopter pilot battling PTSD, insomnia, and alcoholism. That small character seed quietly shapes everything he does in the movie. Why is he awake and drinking when the Norwegian dog first arrives? Why does he say he's a real light sleeper? Why is he always ready to take control? It's not just paranoia. It's trauma simmering under the surface. This subtle, off-screen storytelling makes MacReady feel real, grounded, and unpredictable. He's not just a hero fighting a monster. He's a broken man clinging to control while the world melts down around him. Number 9. Stop-motion monster scenes were filmed but rejected. Before that unforgettable practical effects climax, there was a different plan. Stop-motion. Special effects wizard Randall William Cook, who'd later work on The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, built an intricate miniature of the set and animated the Blair Thing thrashing wildly. But when John Carpenter saw the footage, he wasn't convinced. The stop-motion didn't match the gritty realism of Rob Bottin's puppetry. So Carpenter scrapped most of it, keeping only a blink and you'll miss it shot in the final cut. The unused animation eventually surfaced on home video, and while it's impressive, it just doesn't carry the same visceral punch. The practical effects? Legendary. Carpenter trusted physical artistry over gimmicks, and that same approach shows up again in Fact 18, where the opening title sequence burns into memory using only smoke, fire, and a fish tank. Number 10. Keith David broke his hand the day before filming started. Talk about bad timing. A day before filming began, Keith David, who played Childs, was in a car accident that broke his hand. He showed up on set wrapped in bandages, and Carpenter immediately sent him to the hospital. The solution? A surgical glove plus a second glove painted to match his skin tone. If you watch closely, you'll notice his left hand is kept off camera for most of the film's first half. That wasn't a stylistic choice, it was clever camera blocking to hide the injury. Despite the accident, David delivered one of the most intense performances of his career. And by the time we reached that fiery final stare-down, you'd never know he was fighting through pain the whole time. If these behind-the-scenes secrets are haunting your mind, just wait, we're only halfway through the supernatural grind. If you're loving the ride so far, hit that like button so more horror fans can discover it too. And hey, make sure you subscribe because it's the only way to protect yourself from things that go bump in the night. We're talking hidden screams, prosthetic nightmares, and casting choices that could have changed everything. But the next 10 facts will only raise your blood pressure and terror if you've remembered to like and hit the notification bell to get alerted to our next exorcism. All right, let's get back to the blood and paranoia. Number 11. Ennio Morricone recycled unused music from the film for The Hateful Eight. Remember that nerve-wracking ambiguity back in Fact 2? That same dread hangs over the entire scene, and Morricone amplified it with his minimalist heartbeat-like score. You'd swear John Carpenter composed The Thing's score himself. That chilling, heartbeat-like rhythm feels straight out of his synth playbook, but it was actually written by legendary maestro Ennio Morricone, the genius behind scores for the good, the bad, and the ugly, and countless other classics. Shockingly, critics hated it at the time. Morricone even got a Razzie nomination for his minimalist, dread-soaked music. 3 decades later, in a wild twist of fate, Morricone dusted off unused tracks from The Thing and repurposed them for another snowbound tale of paranoia and mistrust. That score went on to win him his first ever Oscar for Best Original Score. So, in a strange way, The Thing helped win an Oscar 30 years after its release. Proof that genius doesn't rot, it just waits in the cold. Number 12. Carl Weathers, Ernie Hudson, and Isaac Hayes were considered for Childs. Before David Clennon landed his breakout role as Childs, John Carpenter had his eyes on some serious star power. Carl Weathers, fresh off Rocky, Ernie Hudson, before Ghostbusters, and Isaac Hayes of Shaft fame were all top contenders. Hudson reportedly came very close to snagging the part. But Carpenter saw something magnetic in Keith David. That deep, commanding voice and calm intensity. Casting him wasn't just a great creative decision. It launched a career that spanned over 300 roles across film, TV, and video games. Imagine the dynamic if Weathers had faced off against Kurt Russell in that final scene. It might have been iconic, but David's cool restraint gave the thing its perfect balance of suspicion and quiet power. Number 13. Most of the film was shot on refrigerated Los Angeles sound stages. Believe it or not, much of The Thing's icy terror wasn't filmed in the Arctic at all. It was shot in Los Angeles. To sell the illusion of Antarctic cold, John Carpenter had sound stages refrigerated down to -2 degrees Celsius, while it was scorching 38 degrees Celsius outside. Cast and crew would literally step from winter into summer every time they left the set. Carpenter initially suggested shooting inside cold storage lockers, but producers scrapped that after realizing how cramped and dangerous that would be. Instead, the team built full-scale, ice-coated interiors cooled by industrial air conditioning. The result? Authentic-looking breath, frosted hair, and shivering actors. No CGI, no filters. Just pure, uncomfortable realism. Every puff of cold air you see, 100% real misery. Number 14. A double amputee was used for the defibrillator scene. Remember the scrapped miniseries in Fact 5? That ambitious storytelling almost got a more cinematic and brutal extension. And Carpenter's original film still had moments just as shocking. That jaw-dropping defibrillator scene where Dr. Copper's arms get chomped off by Norris's chest is one of horror's most unforgettable moments. But how did they pull it off? With a double amputee and pure practical genius. Carpenter used a stunt performer missing both arms, fitted him with fake prosthetic limbs filled with blood tubing, and had a mechanical rig bite them off mid-shot. To sell the illusion, the stand-in even wore a rubber mask of John Carpenter's assistant or actor David Clennon's face. Uncanny, if you pause it at the right second. Most viewers are too busy recoiling in disgust to notice the face swap, but that trick made the effect seamless. No CGI, no cutaways, just old-school horror magic that still makes audiences squirm 40 years later. Number 15. The computer voice is John Carpenter's then-wife, Adrienne Barbeau. Though The Thing has an all-male cast, there's technically one female voice, and it belongs to Adrienne Barbeau, John Carpenter's wife at the time. She voiced MacReady's snarky chess computer, the only woman at Outpost 31. Barbeau had already starred in The Fog and Escape from New York, so her cameo here was a personal Easter egg. In that quick scene, when the computer calls MacReady's bluff and he douses it with whiskey, it's actually Carpenter's way of adding a touch of irony. The only female presence in the film ends up being destroyed by a man. It's a blink-and-you'll-miss-it detail that fits perfectly with The Thing's lonely, hopeless tone. Even the computer doesn't make it out alive. Number 16. A horror budget that turned heads. In 1982, most horror movies were made on shoestring budgets. But The Thing? This beast came with a jaw-dropping $15 million price tag, a massive gamble for a genre that usually thrived on cheap thrills. To give that some context, Halloween cost $325,000, and Poltergeist clocked in at $10.7 million. But where did a huge chunk of that cash go? Straight into the monsters. Universal originally tried to give effects wizard Rob Bottin just $200,000 to bring the creature to life. Bottin said no way. He needed at least $750,000, and by the end, the effects cost skyrocketed to a staggering $1.5 million. That's 10% of the total budget, just for slime, tentacles, and nightmares. Sure, Universal winced when the box office returned only $19.6 million, but those effects became horror movie royalty. Number 17. The Norwegian Guy Told Us Everything. This might just be the most underrated spoiler in movie history. In the opening scene, when the Norwegian pilot stumbles toward the American camp screaming like a madman, he's not being mysterious. He's literally explaining the entire plot. What he yells in perfect Norwegian translates to, "Get the hell out of there. That's not a dog, it's some sort of thing. It's imitating a dog. Get away, you idiots." If anyone in the camp had actually understood him, they could have burned the alien right then and there. But nope, they just stood there confused and let the nightmare in. It's such a subtle detail that most viewers miss it entirely. It's also a genius storytelling move. The truth was right in front of everyone, but no one could see it. Number 18. The iconic title was made with a fish tank. Remember how Carpenter loved using real hands-on effects back in Fact 9? That same approach shows up in the opening titles. The glowing text slowly burning on screen wasn't made with CGI or fancy tricks. It was smoke, a fish tank, and fire. Here's how. The team drew the film's title onto an animation cell and mounted it behind a fish tank filled with smoke and backlights. Then they covered the tank with a black plastic garbage bag and set it on fire. As the plastic burned away, the light slowly revealed the words, "The Thing." The result? One of the most chilling, instantly recognizable opening title sequences in horror history. No expensive VFX, no computers, just old-school practical ingenuity. Number 19. Rob Bottin was only 22. The monsters in The Thing are pure nightmare fuel, pulsating, mutating, crawling horrors that feel too real. But what's even crazier? The guy responsible for most of it was just 22 years old. Rob Bottin wasn't some Hollywood veteran. He was a young effects prodigy who took on the job when Rick Baker couldn't do it. Bottin led a crew of more than 40 people and worked 7 days a week for over a year. He barely slept. By the end, he was so exhausted he had to be hospitalized with pneumonia. Stan Winston, another effects legend, helped out with the dog thing, but even he refused an official credit so Bottin would get the spotlight. The work Bottin did at 22 still hasn't been topped. It's raw, wet, and terrifying, and somehow timeless. Number 20. Kurt Russell wasn't the first choice. Here's a fact that might melt your brain like alien goo. Kurt Russell, the man who played MacReady, wasn't the first choice, or the second. In fact, he was low on the list. The role was first offered to Nick Nolte and Jeff Bridges, who both turned it down for undisclosed reasons. The studio also toyed with the idea of Kevin Kline, and even dreamed about casting Harrison Ford or Clint Eastwood to pack some extra star power. But none of them bit. Russell, who had worked with Carpenter before, eventually stepped into the role. Flamethrower, beard, and all, and made it iconic. It's one of those rare cases where a Plan B actor becomes the definitive face of a movie. Honestly, can you imagine anyone else saying, "Yeah, fuck you too" to that monster? And because you are the best subscribers on YouTube right now, here's a bonus fact that I can only give you if you've already subscribed. If you're not subscribed, you'll still get the bonus, but you'll be forever in our debt and we send the Thing to do our collecting. Done it? Okay, here you go. That autopsy scene where Blair slices open the Thing's disgusting remains? Yeah, that's not just gooey movie magic, it's real animal organs. John Carpenter wanted the horror to feel raw and nauseatingly authentic, so the FX team used real cow organs, freshly delivered from a slaughterhouse, to fill the chest cavity. The smell was so foul that some crew members straight up had to step outside to keep from puking. Even the actors were gagging during takes. That dedication to realism is exactly why this movie still crawls under your skin 40 years later. It doesn't just look gross, it was gross. The Thing isn't just a horror movie, it's a masterclass in paranoia, practical effects, and tension that still sends chills down spines more than 4 decades later. What started as a box office flop has mutated into one of the most respected horror films ever made. Its influence echoes through every body horror transformation, every who can we trust plot, every snowbound nightmare since. And that ending? Still one of the boldest, most chilling fade-outs in cinema history. But if your nerves need a breather after all that alien carnage, don't worry, I've got you. For something just as weird but a lot more playful, check out Beetlejuice next. Ghosts, ghouls, and some seriously unhinged fun awaits. Let's keep it real weird.
Wow, that was weird.